Hey guys, it's Graham. And earlier this year, I talked to you about how I was going to share some more of my Hunger Games essays here. And, well, here I am. 2024 marked the 16th birthday of this series. In 2008, the market for young adult novels was just starting its downward slide. If you don't remember the early 2000s, it's hard to exaggerate just how dominant young adult books were everywhere. But in August of 2008, Twilight concluded its inexplicably popular run, and Harry Potter had finished in July the year before. There were other bestsellers that had their niche and earned their success, but none of them reached the level of a worldwide cultural sensation like those two. Within a decade, young adult as a genre would be at a fraction of its power. However, The Hunger Games defied that trajectory. It remains the most mature of them all. At a time when every protagonist was compared to Bella Swan or Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen proved that she was neither, in a saga that had something very real to say about the world we live in. A decade and a half after the YA boom died, The Hunger Games is still relevant, and it doesn't look down on you from your bookshelf to fill you with the same sense of embarrassing dread as your dad's disco suit does in his closet. How is this? Well, the answer lies in the genesis of the story, and that it's kind of timeless. Despite what fans of Koushun Takami might tell you, Suzanne Collins didn't come up with the idea for the Hunger Games by reading Battle Royale. It is entirely possible for authors who don't know each other and don't read each other's work to produce similar ideas and even generate similar story beats within those ideas. This happens on a regular basis. I've talked about that in a recent video. For now, I want to get that claim out of the way because fans of Battle Royale are very vocal about their annoyance on this point. If you're unfamiliar, Battle Royale is a novel from Japan, and The Hunger Games is a novel from America. It's not the only dissimilarities between them, but the fact that they were published in different countries and in different languages and in different decades is relevant. Collins drew on a combination of things, one of which was her familiarity with the Greek legend of Theseus and the Minotaur, and how the Minotaur forced people to give up children as tributes on a regular basis. Later, Collins would catch herself channel surfing and toggling between coverage of the Iraq War and reality TV. Again, this was in the mid 2000s. These elements combined and permeated together to form the foundation of the world of the Hunger Games, wherein children were forced to fight each other to the death in order for the government to maintain its power. That was also an element of Battle Royale. Again, I direct you to Theseus and the Minotaur. This was a story about the same thing, thousands of years before either Takami or Collins. Battle Royale did get a film adaptation in 2000 in the Japanese language with a Japanese cast. There had been plans for a Western adaptation, but studios at the time were hesitant to handle such a violent topic in the wake of the Columbine incident of April 1999. Almost a decade after that, The Hunger Games came along and sucked up all the potential oxygen for that kind of story, bolstered by a willing audience for young adult books and movies that had swelled since then. I can understand being one of the niche Western fans for a lesser known book that probably won't get its shot because something similar gained wider traction later on. This frustration, however, does not congeal into some kind of proof that Collins read or drew from Takami in the production of her work. The genesis of her story has remained consistent, and I can say, after having read both books, that they're not at all trying to say the same thing. Collins uses the underaged gladiator element as a cautionary tale against totalitarianism, while Takami is telling more of a horror story and the human will to survive mortal peril. His protagonists team up and hack the game in a technical sense to escape. Collins' characters have to hack the audience and therefore undermine the very reason that the games exist in the first place, which is control of the populace. It's also worth noting that Stephen King's The Running Man novel, which was released under a pen name in 1982, also focuses on a man in a game show to the death, and the show is televised, which is another core element of The Hunger Games. King had nothing but praise for Collins's work, and there's a remake of the Running Man film in the works right now starring Glenn Powell. These things happen. Writers can stumble into similar ideas independent of each other and use them in different ways. Film adaptations can sweep the leg on each other. Sometimes something will pop up and it'll make something else not marketable, not economically viable, and it ends up on the shelf all the time. Theseus and the Minotaur still go to war, but for different reasons and with a different outcome. We're going to get different versions of similar stories. If a story is going to have any power as a metaphor or an allegory, it has to be subtle. Many authors fail this provision and, in their clumsiness, just beat you over the head with it. This requires a delicate hand and the rare quality of restraint, to say nothing of maturity in handling a subject that can be universally recognized. President Coriolanus Snow of the Hunger Games wasn't some cheap stand-in for George W. Bush, who was the unpopular American president at the time of the novel's writing. Katniss wasn't some flawless, overpowered girl boss. Snow was a manifestation of absolute tyrannical power, and Katniss was an example of the tens of thousands of people at the receiving end of that tyranny. She just also happened to have a unique set of attributes, and, combined with a unique set of circumstances, she found herself thrust into the limelight, into the heart of the games, and directly into contention with the president himself. That alone is the exceptional quality of the Hunger Games. Not that it takes place in a post-downfall America, or that there are 13 districts and severe class distinctions, or that everybody has funny names and they use technology for weird things. No, it's the idea that there could be someone like Katniss in your neighborhood, even in your family, who would completely go to war if the right conditions were met. That's not to say that she suddenly became an unstoppable killing machine. Katniss took plenty of damage and had close calls along the way. She faced challenges that were not in her wheelhouse to face. While she was capable of being cold, technical, and indifferent to others, her entire raison d'etre for entering the games was to protect her younger sister. If she didn't volunteer to take Prim's place, Prim would have died. If Katniss didn't win the games and get home, Prim was still likely to die because their mother was prone to mentally checking out. In a world defined by cruelty, exploitation, and indifference, Katniss found the one thing that she loved unconditionally, and through her example, everyone else found the one thing that the Capitol couldn't crush. This particular aspect of Katniss's character and its impact on others is a core component of what it means to be human. This is something that Collins was inspired by when she read the philosophies of David Hume, who examined this. Herd mentality is kind of an oversimplification, but this tendency that we have to do things because others are doing them. And if you can get enough people to do something, you can get everybody to do it. Just as we've often seen tyranny and oppression take hold in the decadent stages of civilization, we've also seen acts of love that push people to make otherwise senseless decisions. It's the universality of this love that has given the Hunger Games its staying power over the last 16 years. Other series in the same young adult genre, while fluffy or enjoyable, didn't have something so profound to pin them up. Divergent was just a girl writing about a girl who was the specialist girl among all the girls and saved the world with her girlness. The Maze Runner was more or less the same thing with a boy as the main character, plus you get to throw in a little bit of the J.J. Abrams style of ask and don't answer to keep things moving. None of those books are really about anything. There's a touch of an idea here and there, and that's it. The rest is about running from danger or winning a fight or being the good guy and fighting the bad guy and looking awesome, and that's it. It's summertime popcorn stuff for its own sake. And let me be clear, I'm not opposed to that. Popcorn fluff has provided hours of pleasant distraction throughout my life, and I'll still defend the movie Battleship. I am right to do so. It just doesn't mean anything for our day-to-day lives. The Hunger Games wears all the right decorations to fit in among the popcorn stuff. There are arenas and monsters and futuristic vehicles and weapons. There are funny names for things. There's a unique in-world language with catchphrases and lingo. You can meme on current events with screenshots from the movies, which for the most part follow the books, although they omit a great deal. But unlike the others of its kind, when you peel those decorations away, there's still a solid structure underneath it all. It's a very real echo of things that have happened and still happen in our world when tyrants take control over the masses. And when a story with this kind of proximity to reality can reach such a wide audience without insulting them, you've created something powerful, a way to disseminate an idea that people might otherwise not be open to analyzing. Such is the power of propaganda. And that's a key element, a key component of the themes and even the world in the Hunger Games. Yes, it's set in a world where the capital has all of the guns and the tanks and the hovercrafts, and they can kill on a whim without any legal repercussions. But of what use is that power when you need people to produce your resources, your food, your clothing, your energy? You need them compliant, which is a delicate balance to maintain. More to the point, you need them to be afraid, and constantly so. The point of the games, then, is to remind the district that they already tried rising up against the capital nearly a century ago, and they got their heads handed to them. The war devastated the country, and they won't survive another one. So a balance is necessary to ensure their future. Every year, the districts are forced to sacrifice 2 children to the arena as a reminder that the capital has power over them, and that as long as they don't try to revolt, this is the worst it will ever be. Besides, play the odds, right? It's probably not going to be you in the arena, and you're only eligible to be drafted for 6 years in your teens. Just let it happen. The price is acceptable. Until it isn't. One of your loved ones is drafted. Suddenly there's a name and a face on the tribute. It's not just some distant price that's paid for by somebody else. That price skyrockets. You run through a cycle of mental exercises as you try to think your way out of the problem, but you always end up in the same place. If you fight to save your loved one, you will die, and other people you love will die, and is that really worse than the status quo? Someone out there will eventually say yes, and when they finally do, others will jump onto that wagon. Whether they have the means to face the capital in a martial contest is irrelevant, because the more substantial fight, that for the will and the mind of the people, the one that the capital has been using propaganda to control, that fight has already been lost. The entire purpose of the games, which is to quell further uprisings, has failed. You suddenly find yourself in a situation where war can be an act of love, and love can be an act of war. The warfare of the Hunger Games is first and foremost mental. It isn't about what happens to the tributes unless the masses get to see it. Once you understand that, you've got to ask yourself, in the real world, do I live in that situation? What's oppressing me? What is the basis of its power? What is the cost of resisting that power? And if enough people resisted it, what would happen? You can ask this question in the context of the summer 2020 race riots or the January 2021 Capitol tours and come up with very intriguing answers. The point is, the question is applicable to both situations and many more besides. What shared belief is the basis of your civilization's stability? Is it right? Is it wrong? Do you understand it correctly? Do you support it or oppose it? Why? These are all things that you should understand in the realm of theory before you ever move into the realm of practice. The Hunger Games walks you through the answers to all of these questions if you take the time to think about it. Here's where we run into some issues because of the timing of its release and its nominal target audience. The Hunger Games is often dismissed as being the same caliber of book as Percy Jackson or Twilight because it came out when those were popular. There's a resistance to read it for what it is because of what it is presumed to be. Trust me, I get it. In the late 2000s, I was not only a big reader of young adult books, I was also trying to break into publishing young adult books. For 2 years, I had an agent who exclusively dealt with books for younger readers, and some publishers even rejected one of my manuscripts because it had too many similarities to the Hunger Games. There were faction-related elements, there was a contest, there was a rigged component to the contest. I know the genre, I was neck-deep with the audience. But speaking as a guy who was 24 when the first book dropped, and am now 40 at the time of this writing, I can tell you that I haven't read many other YA series from that era more than once. I could force myself to do the Maze Runner again and have a decent enough time doing so, provided I didn't have to bother with the sequels. Gun to my head, I could probably read Divergent a second time, but please remember that we have a Geneva Convention. There's a reason I have read the Hunger Games series 4 times and in 2 different languages. It's worth the time, and it's worth the analysis. Next spring, Collins will release the 5th novel in the series called Sunrise on the Reaping. It's about the 50th Hunger Games, which had double the number of tributes in it. The winner, as we know later on, was Hamish Abernathy from District 12, the alcoholic mentor to Katniss Everdeen. I'm unlikely to give an author an absolute hall pass and say that anything they write will be perfect. Even Louis L'Amour has produced some stories that bored me. But I can say that in 2020, when The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes hit shelves, any fears I had of a watered down cash grab were allayed by Collins's flawless execution. She went back to the well and she took good care of her story, not doing any damage to what she'd established a decade prior. Before The Hunger Games came out, Collins had spent almost 20 years writing for film and television. Not only does this cinematic tone apply itself well to a fast paced story, her skill and experience in writing are on plain display. She knows what she's doing and she's doing it well. This gives me every bit of optimism that a fifth book will do the job that readers want it to. Over the next few months, I'll be rereading the existing 4 books in their release order. While Ballad is a prequel, its value derives from what pre-exists it, so we'll go with that structure. I'll be taking notes on a chapter-by-chapter basis for other long-form videos and essays. As always, to keep up to date with what I'm doing, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I've also got a Substack going over there. I publish there regularly. However, posts do get archived and paywalled after 6 months, so if you want access to the back stuff, including the essay version of this video, it's either $5 a month or $40 will get you the whole year, and I do publish plenty of exclusively paywalled items. So I appreciate you guys' support, and till next time, drive safe. See you out there.